at some point I disappeared. I literally became one with the cosmos, with the environment, with everything around me. There was no sense of space or time. It's just the most incredible sense of being at one with all, with everything, with this incredible energy that defines everything that we are and beyond. And of being connected with God. It was like being at one with God, being God in God's presence, and being unified with God, like going home, like that feeling of finally going home. And it was unbelievably powerful. And I came out of that, and I remember looking up in the skylight, and there was the moon. It was this perfectly clear night, and I just saw the moon, and it was the pink moon, and I broke down, and I was like, that epiphany, that's when it all landed for me. The penny dropped. It was just, everything just came together in that experience, in that moment.
Welcome back to the Humankinder podcast. There is one word that has inspired more love, more connection, more compassion, and yet more hatred, violence, and fear than any other in our human vocabulary. It has been sung from the church pews to the synagogues, to the ashrams, to the mosques, to the campfires and the caves, and in the hearts of billions for generations and generations. And yet it has also been screamed from castle walls and battlegrounds and terrorist attacks and massacres. There is one word that has the potential to create such unity in us, and yet also such division. And that word, of course, is God. And every human being, no matter whether we're doing this consciously, like on the spiritual path, or unconsciously, we all wrestle with God. And my guest today is a sort of professional God wrestler. Matthew Gregorowski has written a beautiful book called Son of a Preacher Man that details his journey to know God in his own heart through apartheid in South Africa, to years travelling, and through a long multi-decade career in the corporate world as a senior executive. And he comes to share his story today. Matthew, welcome.
Thank you. Lovely to be here. It's a great privilege.
Yeah, it's beautiful to have you. I would love you to take me back, right, to when you first started to wrestle with God.
Wow, that's a great question. And if I think about the early part of my book and my first experiences of God, they were through my father. And I remember very vividly being a young boy. We'll get to the environment that I grew up in a few minutes. But one of the things that I was very traumatized by very early on in life was this vivid dream, repetitive, recurring dream that I had about being left behind by the world. And I would fall asleep and then just see this kind of spinning earth as if I was being extracted out into space, and seeing the world kind of becoming smaller and running away from me. And I was trying to scream as loud as I could to let people know that I was being left behind, and you were screaming into this vacuum. There's no sound coming out. And I just felt this immense sense of anxiety that all of the people that I loved and everything that I knew that was familiar was just being left behind, and I was being sucked out into this void, and it was terrifying. And that's when I started wetting the bed when I was really young. I think I was 5 years old, and that was a pattern that started for many years. It came from this repetitive nightmare. And I remember my father would come into the room because I would be screaming and wake up. My parents would come running in and going, "Is it the dream again?" And my mom would first clean the sheets and get the bed all set up again. And then my dad I would lay down and he would put his hands on me, and it was always one hand on the forehead and one hand on the heart. And he would pray with me, and he would pray that the anxiety would leave me and that God would give me peace. And I just remember being terrified of falling back to sleep, but then just being overwhelmed by this sense of calm, this real sense of just that I was in a safe space, and that as long as my Father's hands were on me, that nothing bad would happen to me. And it gave me that immense sense of just peace and calmness, and then that would soothe me back to sleep, and then I'd go from there. And so my first experience of God, even though I didn't have any concept intellectually of what God was, this experience of my Father laying his hands on me. And so I think that in the very early part of the book, I talk about my Father's hands as being very symbolic of everything that he came to represent to me as a young boy in terms of his authority and his empathy and his ability just to heal people through this immense power that seemingly to me was in his hands. And then growing up in this kind of religious environment, this strict upbringing, it was very confined in many respects, in that we had to live up to the expectation of going to church and being baptized and being confirmed and going through all those processes that many of us do growing up in those Christian environments, but also being very restricted in terms of what we could do as young teenagers. And so my experience of God was probably tainted in some way by the expectation or my parents instilling in us these disciplines that we needed to attend church. We needed to go and follow these religious practices because it was meaningful to them. And that's the way that they connected with God, was through Jesus Christ, was through the church, was through the teachings of the Anglican Church. And it was only much later on in life that I worked out that they wanted us to have the same experience that they had because it was so deeply meaningful to them. It wasn't about them just forcing us to go and attend rituals that were intended to be not meaningful to us. Their intention was for us to have those same rich experiences. I just never had that experience through the doctrine of Christianity early on. And that's what stimulated in me this kind of deep desire to go and find my own connection with God in my own way. But there was another layer of complexity to that, which was that my father's father was a minister. And my uncle was also a lifelong minister. And both my dad and his brother, there were four of them, were adamant that they weren't going to follow in their father's footsteps and go into the priesthood because they had firsthand experience of how tough it was. You don't earn a lot of money following a vocation of calling. I think you get paid something called a stipend, which is a kind of living wage. And so the idea that you have to feed and support a family with that is very challenging in many ways, and was for our whole upbringing. But for that reason, they were both adamant, no, they're going to chart their own course. And both of them, when they were 17, second last year of school, got the calling. They just got the tap on the shoulder, and that was it. They just did a 180-degree pivot. And from that day forward, for both of them, it was unequivocal. No, we're going to go to theological college. We're going to study to become priests, and we're going to dedicate our life to service, to serving God. And that, to me, once I was old enough to understand conceptually what that was, and I asked my father about this several times, I just really needed to understand that, because I couldn't conceptually understand how somebody could make that kind of just change course so quickly and with such conviction from such a young age. And of course, later on in life, I realized that he had found his purpose. They'd both found their purpose. And then they dedicated their lives to 50 plus years in the priesthood. My uncle was a bishop in the church. My father was very high up in the Anglican diocese as well as an archdeacon. And they both dedicated lifelong, and it's not just a 9-to-5 job. It's an all-encompassing 24/7. You are supporting the community. You are on call all of the time. The work of healing and helping people on their soul's journey is it's not confined by time and space. It's an ongoing proposition. So part of what stimulated this kind of yearning in me to find my own way and to find my own connection with God was just to understand my father and how he could do that. And that was very powerful. But the other thing that I would say is that despite not having that firsthand connection or feeling of God in that environment growing up, what it did instill in me was this incredible moral compass. And, I've got a lot of friends who I admire and love, and, they're wonderful human beings, and they didn't grow up in that environment. And they always kind of, talked about that thing that you do, when it comes to going to church and these religious practices and, the kind of rituals around it. But there was something really just so compelling about being in that environment where there was no other way to just construct yourself as a human being. It was it's almost like there's this code of how to be, and that in itself to me was has been so valuable to me later on in life, because there was it gave me some guardrails, and there were many, many times where those guardrails were tested, but ultimately it's kept me on my course. And so, I would say to anybody who is struggling with the concept of religion or bringing up their children in an environment where they don't necessarily have full conviction in it, there's a lot to be said for giving your children that kind of guidance early on in life, and setting them on the right path and helping them understand the core principles of how we conduct ourselves as humans and how we relate to other humans, and the value that we put in relationships and community. I saw firsthand the community connections that religion gave to people. It was vastly beautiful. And we grew up in parishes that were, for the most part, very poor communities, where, people didn't earn a lot of money. They were a lot of them on the breadline, and religion to them was gave them their sense of purpose, gave them their sense of joy. And you saw that playing out inside the church walls. Even though I wasn't having that experience, I could see it emanating from other people. There was this kind of powerful energy that was so attractive to me. And that's almost kind of partly what stimulated me to want to know that and to understand that. And so, to all those people that would question the value of religion, to me, the whole idea that even if none of this existed, even if God didn't exist, even if it was all a fallacy and when we all died, nothing happened and that was just it, that was the end, the amount of joy and sense of purpose and sense of belonging and community connection that this practice gave to so many people who had so little, to me, that was always, that gave it enough validity for it to exist.
Yeah.
And I grew up in this environment of really seeing firsthand and experiencing firsthand the power of this energetic realm. The concept of God to me was still traditionally the way people describe it. But even though I didn't experience it, I was always immersed by the value of religion, of God, of these kind of guardrails that were given to me. So it was an immensely beautiful thing.
Yeah, thank you for articulating that and taking us inside your experience. And I want to dive deeper into this question about morality, because in many ways, from a religious viewpoint, God bestows a sense of morality. And yet from an atheist perspective, morality seems an inherently human experience. And in the book, you mention growing up, and particularly as a teenager, maybe as a preteen, seeing your father and your mother in their imperfection also. So in one, there's the preaching, there's the Sunday, there's the healing, there's all of the really high spiritual experience that are happening. And yet there are also the everyday, the arguments, the disagreements over different things, the people behaving in less than morally perfect and the human experience. So how do you reconcile that, almost like the God-given perfection that of the religious world versus the behavior of some people in that community that are just human and flawed the same as we are? And how did that show up for you over your teenage years and rebelling against the church? Can you take me to your experience there of wrestling with that aspect of it?
So you're referring to the imperfections of my parents, for example?
Yeah, and the people, like people in church, and where one thing is being said, and in that moment it's being embodied and it's beautiful, but then there are just arguments and people being unkind and people being less tolerant and not forgiving and all of the things that Jesus talked about.
Yeah.
And that can really put off a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering, how did you wrestle with that growing up? And as you pushed back against those religious doctrines, and you mentioned going out to smoking, drinking, all those different things, really testing those boundaries. What was that like for you?
Yeah. I'd say one of the aspects of the religious doctrine, of the formulas that you'd go through on a weekly basis, talking through the Anglican Book of Prayer, the creed, all of the different components of a church service. Sometimes they'd be very formulaic and you're just going through the motions of the words, even though they don't mean anything to you. But there's always this part of the church service where you ask for forgiveness for your sins. And one of the core premise of Christianity is that Jesus Christ died for us, for the absolution of our sins. And he carried that burden. And as a result of that, we have the ability to recognize our own flaws and to really genuinely, in a heartfelt way, be sorry for those things, those imperfections, and to ask for forgiveness. And so there's this kind of ritual aspect every Sunday of you turning up and acknowledging, we're not perfect, and I made all of these mistakes, and I wish I hadn't responded in that way, or I was really overreacted to that situation, or did this thing that I really wish I hadn't done that. But there was this opportunity every week to reset the dial and to go, okay, I'm acknowledging that, and I genuinely ask for forgiveness. And I think for a lot of people, that was a very important part of that ritual, where they could turn up and put all of those imperfections on a plate and go, here it is, I'm offering that up. And they walk out of that service and they feel like, okay, they've got a fresh perspective on things and can go into the week ahead feeling good about themselves. And so that was, whether or not you believe in that, that in itself was a beautiful thing that people took away from church services. Of course, my parents weren't perfect. Nobody is perfect. Living in an environment where financial stress is always a big issue, with 4 children growing up in a rectory, it's inordinately challenging to fund 4 kids going through school and university, as it turns out, and they did that successfully. And if you ask my father today what was his greatest achievement, he would say it's that, and he still considers that to be a miracle in some way. But my parents were also adamant that every month, irrespective of how challenging things were, they tithed. They gave 10% of what they had to the church. And somehow, because of their dedication to doing that and their dedication to the community and there's so much of what they do that is giving of themselves without an expectation of receiving anything in return. And somehow that what they put out into the universe through that work, it comes back tenfold. And they did manage to put 4 kids through school and through university and to put clothes on our backs. And things were tough, but it was, to them, that's my father's, it was still today his greatest cross to bear, that he wished that he could have done more for us. But we're 4 very grounded, loving, wholesome children, and I keep reminding them of that. And it's an incredible achievement. But just coming back to their imperfections, Dad wasn't around a lot. He was always on call. He was doing house church visits. When we lived in District 6, he was running 2 separate parishes, doing lots of church services, looking after 2 sets of parishioners. And my sisters, I think, particularly feel like they were very aware of the fact my father wasn't at home a lot. My mother had a big burden of responsibility on her shoulders, not just to raise 4 children, but also to fulfill all of her obligations as a priest's wife, as a member of the community, as a leader in the community. And she did a lot of work for the church and also helped with house visits and did a lot of work with women in the parishes. So how they managed to fit all of that in, who knows? But it also put a lot of pressure on their relationship. And there were some really tough times. And some of them were extremely challenging. And as I write about in the book, at one point, my mother actually left for a few days. And I just remember being so terrified because it was at the end of this really, there were arguments and there were disagreements. And even though they're both fundamentally good people, these things just build up. And my father wasn't the best communicator in the world. And that's a byproduct of his own upbringing. And they didn't really workshop things together, and they built up, and then they became these, they came to a head. And I remember one night, and we lived in a house, the parish house. It was a long passage, and all the kids' bedrooms were all lined up, and my parents' bedroom was at the one end and mine was at the other end next to the bathroom. And it was quite late at night, and I remember hearing them getting to this really heated argument, worse than I'd ever heard. And it really terrified me. And I couldn't hear all the words, but I could understand that my mother was essentially threatening to go. And then I woke up in the morning and she was gone. And my dad was in his study and he didn't come out for a long time. And I just remember being in the kitchen, and my sisters came in and they didn't say anything. My brother came in and didn't say anything. And eventually, around lunchtime, my dad came out and sat us down and said, look, Mum was going away for a few days just to spend some time with her parents. And my sisters were really young. And I remember them asking 1,000 questions around when she's coming back and all this sort of stuff. And he struggled his way through it. But I wasn't sure what was going to happen next. It was terrifying. She did come back. She came back about 4 days later. And that was a defining moment for me in many ways. And I thanked her for coming back. And she said this beautiful thing to me, which was, I was always coming back. But to me, it just represented the fact that to her, that was never an option. Family was always her main priority. But what she needed to do was just to have some time to go and wrestle her own demons and come to terms with the things that she was battling with. And so she needed that time to herself. Of course, now time to oneself is one of the things that I value most. And I'm the greatest proponent of that. And I think everybody absolutely needs to have time to themselves, to invest in themselves. In those days, that was a luxury that wasn't afforded many people just because of the chaos of their lives. And but she came back and she stayed. And there was this beautiful undercurrent of, yeah, things are tough, but I'm never going to abandon you. You're my biggest priority. And I was always very grateful to her for that. My parents battled themselves in many respects against this weight of oppression. It wasn't just the struggles of their own daily lives, but growing up in apartheid, in that system where only white South Africans were entitled to vote. And so we were in the minority. When I say we, the English-speaking, those of English-speaking descent versus those of Afrikaner descent, as in a broad generalization. And it was the Afrikaners who were the architects of apartheid, and the Dutch Reformed Church played a big role in that. And so they were big. They played a very big role in fighting against this system, which they really fundamentally just believed in their heart was wrong, and often at a personal risk themselves. My dad was locked up more than once and spent time in prison cells, being part of demonstrations and marches. They would march from the cathedral in the centre of Cape Town to District 6, where actually, that became the sort of poster child for opposition movement. And my father was the minister there for many years before it got torn down by the government. And they would, and that was a very unifying experience because it brought together all of the different denominations, the Methodists and the Lutherans, and everyone would just come. Catholics and Anglicans would come and join and walk together down St. George's Street. And much to the state it was a big issue for the state because they couldn't touch the church. If you're a representative of the church, senior people in the church, you were untouchable to an extent, but they could still lock you up. And they could still make a statement. And they weren't beyond the kind of strong arm of the law in that respect. But to them, they could use that status as heads of the church, as leaders in the church, to really elevate the gravitas of that statement, of the message that they were trying to convey. And so that was a very powerful part of my upbringing, where I saw and I witnessed all of this activity. And that, again, instilled in me just a huge amount of respect for my parents, for and it comes back to that moral code, standing up for the things that they believed in, even if it came at the cost of their own personal safety. Now, obviously, you've got to balance that with the responsibilities of your families, and you've got to tread the line to a certain extent. You still feel like you're going to be able to fulfill those duties. But they were so passionate about the cause because the cause was something worth fighting for. And I can only imagine what it was like for them seeing Nelson Mandela come out of Robben Island. I can only imagine what it's like for them seeing the government capitulate and hand over to the ANC at the end of that process. And it hasn't necessarily been a very happy ending in many respects. But at that time, and the legacy that Nelson Mandela left behind was a very beautiful thing. And that was a very powerful time in the country's history. And the church was a very big part of that. And I just remember being so in awe of my parents during that time because of that just dedication to the cause. And then the other thing I'd say is that even though I didn't really understand this idea of their spiritual connection, I witnessed some things like they would do house church where people from different parishioners would come and gather in our lounge room, and Dad would sit around and play the guitar, and they would sing songs of praise, and there was talking in tongues. And I was a young child at that time, and I was just gawking into...
Can you explain what talking with tongues means for people who are not familiar with that?
Yeah, sure. And I asked my mother about this. She was always at the front and leading by example, but essentially it's another form of channeling where this group of people would come together and sit and pray and be in praise and really just connecting to God. And they would be praying for whatever it was, whether it be the country or the absolution of poverty or whatever it was that they felt most riled about or really wanted to invest their positive intention and energy into. And they would pray. And it's almost like they got lost in their own consciousness, and the words that would come out, that in their intentions would be completely lucid, and they would be thinking about all these things that they would be asking God to solve for, but the words that came out of their mouth were nonsensical. It's in a language that nobody could ever understand or articulate, and it's a gift of the Spirit. That's how my mom used to describe it. It's a gift of the Spirit. And they would all be talking in this different language in unison, even though nobody knew how to decipher what it was. But it was just a different manifestation of this powerful, energetic download. And that was, to me, the first experience of consciousness at play that I had no concept around. And obviously, much later on in life, I'm now fixated by the idea, and I've had lots of my own experiences in that realm. But that, to me, early on was quite enlightening.
Yeah, it's on that. It's rare, I think, to hear about channeling in the Christian context, because it's usually something that those of us on the spiritual path now associate with people who channel spirits, or they go and they connect. And people can Google this, you can look it up. They connect into what they would describe as beings at different dimensions, different levels of consciousness, and when they say channeling, it means information comes through them intuitively, which they then share, which is coherent and coming from somewhere that's not themselves. And they would channel, as they would describe, different light beings, they talk about different races in the galaxy, actually, like Palladians, Arcturians, and they call it light language, is another way I've heard it being called. And also there are a lot of creatives and poets and artists who say that there's a muse, that when they connect into this space, something flows from them that is coherent and beyond their own intellectual capability or wisdom. And so just to bring a universal lens to it, there seems to be something very real here that we're capable to do. I think all of us have this experience of having an insight that sort of came from nowhere, and it's wow, that was amazing. And you would have experienced this writing your book, but everyone can know this place, and it's just through the intuition. And I guess the real question is, where are you channeling from? because often for us, when we're in lower states, when we're in fear and blame and anger, stuff can come through us in this intuitive way that's not of the mind, that can be quite destructive. And so I just wanted to point that out as an ability that we all have in various degrees, and not something to be afraid of, but something to be understood. So I just want to point that out. But so take us back. So you're in then the sitting room and people are talking tongues, they're singing words of praise. There's a vibration, there's an energy in the place that just is calling to you on a heart level, but yet you've never fully experienced what they seem to be experiencing. And so what was your journey like then to leave that place and go on your own search? You mentioned traveling to Thailand, seeing some of the most horrendous parts of God's kingdom or of the world. And I'd be interested to hear on, where did you go next on your travels, and how did you reconcile some of the things that happened there with the idea of God also?
So, yeah, those early experiences of seeing my parents in that state and doing that channeling, and when you grow up and I'm 50 years old now and I've had lots of experiences, but there are some that are so vivid and stick with you as these kind of monumental things that you remember, that almost like milestones, these guideposts or just beacons of learning, of awareness creation. And to me, that was a beacon of awareness creation, that experience of, and I can almost see myself standing there as a young boy looking in to the living room and seeing that scene play out. And it fascinated me. I had no idea what it was and what it was all about, but the energy that came out of that room was palpable. It was electrifying, mesmerizing. And that's part of what, and many things, stimulated my desire to understand it, because it was so powerful. I could see how powerful, I could see the power of a group of people coming together and the energy that emanated from that. I needed to understand that. Even as a young child, I didn't even know that at that point, but that's part of stimulated my curiosity in it. And so when I grew up, continued in that environment, and then left home when I was 23 after university, went traveling and was actually intending to come back to South Africa after a couple of years traveling around the world and being in the UK for a little while. I couldn't come back because I tried to get work in the post-apartheid South Africa. And so as joyful as that whole experience was, as a white male, I was not what you call it from a previously disadvantaged background. And even though I had a great education there, I went to a good school in South Africa, my CV would always go to the bottom of the pile. And so I ended up going back to the UK because I could get an ancestral visa and work there. And so it turned out that, and I had no intention of when I went traveling that I would never come back, but it just turned out that's the way things worked out. And I lived in the UK and got into a successful corporate career, and it fulfilled all of those desires in me to, same as my father, not follow in his footsteps, gain financial freedom, not have to live with the same stresses that they grew up with, or we had in that environment at home. And there was this kind of big ego play, of being in this successful career, and which I built up over many years, of having financial freedom and being able to do all the things that you want to do, and going off to Europe on holidays and going snowboarding all the time, and just having it's great. London life is great when you've got money. It's awesome. But there was always this kind of undercurrent of, despite all of these perceived successes, that it wasn't the real me, that this kind of egoic kind of creation of success wasn't who I was. And so, there's this kind of metaphor I talk about in the book of looking myself in the mirror. And that actually happened many, many times in a physical way as well. I'd be at these parties and, just living in a great house with lots of awesome people and just living the high life. And it was amazing. But, when it came to the end of the day and I was looking myself in the mirror, I didn't like who I saw, and I couldn't live with not being the person that I knew intuitively that I wanted to be. And all of that stuff came to a head, and for practical reasons mostly, but I ended up leaving London and ended up going to Australia, which was always my lifelong dream, to come live in Australia. And that wasn't necessarily an easy journey either. But I was with a partner at the time, a German girl, Nina, and so that was part of the reason of leaving, and we decided to go traveling. And on our travels, as you referred to, we had this experience in Thailand in Kanchanaburi, it's the setting of the movie The Bridge of the River Kwai. And we'd gone there for just trying to get off the beaten path a little bit. But what we didn't appreciate was the kind of murky underbelly of this place, and particularly around the human trafficking. And this is part of what I write about in the book as well. We had this experience of meeting this group of girls in a bar. They were early 20s, young, vibrant, beautiful, highly energetic, just amazing humans. We just rolled into this strip of bars and befriended this set of girls. And one of them in particular was a girl called Arya. She was from Myanmar, beautiful, halfway through her engineering degree, spoke 3 languages, just incredible human being, and really took to her and her group of friends. And what happened was that we were having shots and playing pool and listening to cool music, and it was great fun. But then at midnight, the proprietor came out and tapped them all on the shoulder, and they all had to go and work. And there were these, you couldn't have created more of a stereotype if you tried. There were these old, overweight, bald, fat men sitting at the bar, nursing their perspiring beers and just waiting for girls to come and sit next to them and then take them home. And it was horrifying just seeing that and seeing these beautiful humans having to go and sell their souls. And it was such a massive thing for me, and I just couldn't reconcile it. So we went back the next night because I talked to Nina about it, and we both needed to satisfy our curiosity as to how this sort of thing can happen, probably in our own naivety. But we went back the next night and spoke to Arya, and we had the same experience, like long lost friends rolling into the bar. And then at some point we pulled her aside. And the sad part about it is that she was sent there by her own parents. And the idea was that she would go and work in prostitution for a few years and send money through her her proprietors, whoever they were, to feed her family and to send her young brother and sister to university and so they could be educated. But it was a life lived on hope, and that she never got to speak to her parents. All the money that she made was given in trust to her traffickers, and I wouldn't be surprised if not very much of it made its way back to the way it was intended. And so that was a very, coming back to those milestone moments in life, that was a big eye-opener for me, and it wouldn't leave me. That whole experience wouldn't leave me, and I felt like I really needed to do something about that. I couldn't just let that lie. There was just a kind of deep sense of yearning that this moment in my life was a trigger, was something. It was something I needed to respond to, but I didn't know what to do or how to respond to it. And that's what years later, once I got to Australia and started my whole writing journey, because I started writing a book with this young Asian girl as the main protagonist, and then it morphed into Son of a Preacher Man, which we'll get onto. But there are these kind of defining moments that we have in life, and you either act on them or you don't. And so there's this, for all of us, we have this kind of calling at some point to respond to these things. And so I just felt like there was no option for me but to respond in some way. And so I did, and that kind of took me on my writing journey. But what happened at the same time as getting to Australia was I needed to find work. I ended up getting sponsored, which I needed to get sponsored, and that was tough. So it took me a while to find work. Started working in this small PR agency for a man that I didn't like or respect. It was a tough time. I was going through a relationship breakdown with Nina, and we separated after 7 months of living there once I'd found work. And I just remember leaving her in the apartment and packing the car and going to Manly, where I live now, have been for the last 12 or 13 years, and just having to start again. And that was a real kind of low point in my life, where I'd lost the woman I thought I was going to be with for forever. I was in a job that I despised. Part of me was still in Southeast Asia, where there was this longing for me to still do something about this experience. And I was in a corporate situation that it just couldn't resonate with me. And I all of my life suffered from intense anxiety, debilitating anxiety, which continued to manifest through my professional career. Stress, I just felt like you get to those points in your life where you just feel like what's the point? You can't get any lower. And I needed something. I needed a catalyst to change my mindset, change my perspective. And these friends of mine of Nina's and mine who we've met traveling, they had said that they were going off. We'd met them in the Philippines, and they said they were going off to India to look at the different forms of meditation and try and work out what form of practice of meditation was going to be most suited to them. And I always had the sense of wanting to get into meditation, but I didn't really know much about it. And so I said to them, please let me know once you've had that experience. Tell me what you've learned, because I want to know. And so I remember going to work one morning when my whole world was falling apart, and I got this email from this girl, Emma, and she basically said, we've tried them all. There's this one form we think is going to be perfectly suited to your life. It's called Transcendental Meditation. Give it a go. It's 20 minutes twice a day. It's mantra-based. It's really easy. It's really intuitive. And so I called the TM Centre, York Street, and then went the next day and signed up. And so when I had to reinvent myself, coming back to being in Manly, I started my meditation journey then, and I started my writing journey then. And the meditation practice itself was initially just, if it had been just better sleep, just feeling more grounded, just managing stress better and being less anxious, and just feeling this sense of better connection with myself. If that had been it, it would have been worth its weight in gold 10 times over. But what I didn't realize was that it was the gateway to this whole spiritual journey, this whole spiritual awakening, this whole giving me the channel, coming back to the channel, to connect with God in my own way. And that's what meditation ultimately gave me. It gave me the ability for me to understand my father and to understand ultimately in my heart what my father felt and how he could do what he did and how he could give up and sacrifice so much and follow this path of service. And it was immensely enlightening. And there was this moment where, this was 4 or 5 years into a twice daily meditation practice, where I was on this retreat. It was a TM retreat, and there were 80 different meditators coming from around the world to this retreat. It was Maharishi's birthday, 12th of January, which I think is your birthday as well.
It is.
And I just, coming back to those moments of standing outside that house church and it being that small boy looking into that room and being mesmerized by the power of these groups of people coming together in unity to connect in their own, in the same way. I had some exposure to group meditations, which were eminently more powerful than just doing this by yourself. And so I came to this retreat and I thought, wow, this is going to be immense. 80 different meditators coming from all different parts of the world come together. This is going to be so powerful. And so we got there into the retreat center and were sent to our individual rooms. And I felt cheated in a way because we were just given these repetitive rounds of pranayama, which is alternate nostril breathing, this light yoga practice, Ayurvedic yoga, and then doing our TM practice and just doing that on repeat several times a day. And we'd meet for meals and things like that and some teachings and what have you. But I walked out of there 2 days later just feeling like I'd been cheated. I was expecting all of this mass group meditations. And anyway, it was a couple of days later, I was walking down York Street in the city, and just out of nowhere, I was overwhelmed by this wave of euphoria. I just had no idea where it came from, what was behind it. It just lifted me up like I was walking 2 feet above the ground. And I'd never experienced anything like this. It was just this most immense sense of peace and well-being, and my heart was just expanding. It was going to explode, and I just felt, like supercharged. And I floated down the street, and I was like, wow, what's going on? And in that moment, I just realized that the power of what we were doing on that weekend could not be confined by physical boundaries like walls. Like we were all in this place at the same time, doing the same thing, creating this powerful, energetic, this kind of super I don't even know what to call it. It's just, and it was so eye-opening to me then. And I just went, wow, this is incredible. Like, how is this even possible? And so I went home that evening and I was meditating alone in my townhouse upstairs in Manly. And I just had this experience of, I must have been a few minutes into my meditation. And at some point I disappeared. I literally became one with the cosmos, with the environment, with everything around me, just in this immense, there was no sense of space or time. I have no idea how long I was there. But that feeling that I experienced that afternoon, it came back. There was that, but tenfold. It was just the most incredible sense of being at one with all, with everything, with this incredible energy that defines everything that we are and beyond. And of being connected with God. It was like being at one with God, being God in God's presence and being unified with God, like going home, like that feeling of finally going home. And it was unbelievably powerful. And I came out of that and I remember looking up in the skylight and there was the moon. It was this perfectly clear night. And I just saw the moon and it was a pink moon. And I broke down. And I was like, that epiphany, that's when it all landed for me. The penny dropped. It was just, everything just came together in that experience, in that moment. Just the understanding of my father, that how he could do what he did, just the feeling. It was so overwhelming and so beautiful. And I was like, okay, I get it. I get it now. And I want everybody to know what I now know. I want everybody to experience what I've experienced. This immense sense of just, we are one just tiny part of something that's so much bigger than we are. And so much, it's so powerful. And our ability as individuals to tap into that and to be part of that and to contribute to that and contribute to that at an energetic level is, and through that process to then implement change and to drive positive change in this chaotic world that we've created for ourselves. It all landed in that time. Everything from the teachings of the Anglican church that I grew up in and not understanding those words of the Anglican prayer book, finding alignment between that and all of the Buddhist teachings that I'd been exposed to and everything that had ever been taught by anybody in this context of religion, of God, embodiment of God. And it all just came back to the same basic premise of finding God within, of this experience this ability that we all have to tap into this beautiful realm of possibility of oneness, of love, of unifying love through our inward journeys. And then all of the scriptures and everything, it just came apparent to me. It just all made sense to me suddenly, just like boom, in that moment. And I was like, wow, we're all doing the same thing. We're all absolutely doing the same thing. It's just in different wrappers. And why are we so fixated about our own individual wrappers? If this is so beautiful, if this is so powerful, it cannot just be available to a chosen few or to a select group of people. It's just not possible. And at that point, I was just morphing into the new writing journey, which is writing Son of a Preacher Man through the work I did with Victoria, and that's all set out in the book. And so that then guided the journey of the writing and the channeling. Coming back to the channeling, it all just felt so right. And there's so many times when you're writing that you question yourself and you question what you're doing and who am I to be writing a book? Are you kidding yourself? What have I got to say? But the one thing that never let me down was the process and trusting in the process. And I just keep coming back to it because there was this deep yearning, this desire to do this work. And I kept coming back to this, to Aria and the whole thing that kicked it off and the purpose of what I was doing and the journey that I'd been on to get to that point, to write this, to do this work. And it was always from God. It was always God's work. It was always just me being the vessel for writing and capturing what was coming through the process. And sometimes you sit down and you go, I'm going to write now. And I've got 2 hours and just nothing comes. And other times you're walking down the street and you're going, whoa, And I run to the office and I go for the first half an hour, I just put myself in a room and I just download what was coming. So you just never know when it's going to come. But ultimately, all the way through that, it's just, you just trust the process. And I remember when I had no idea how I was going to know when I was finished. And because you've got to rewrite chapters and rewrite sections. I was just rewriting the final chapter of the book. And I finished the last word. And I just remember sitting there. I was sitting at my table in my Manly apartment. And this wave of just emotion just hit me just from out of nowhere. Just wow, like all of the pent up emotion that I'd been investing in going through this process over many years of writing just hit me, and I just started bawling. It just floods of tears, just coming out of nowhere. I couldn't stop it. Just for 5-10 minutes, I just bawled and bawled and bawled and bawled. And I just remember the words, the message that came loud and clear was, "The work is done." It was the most incredible experience, because then in that moment, I just felt at peace. I felt all of that time, that yearning, that desire to do something, to do this work and just to get it all down. And finally it was done. And it was incredible. And I'm so grateful for the experience, not just writing about yourself and writing about your own journey, but having the opportunity to be a vessel for doing this work that I know is going to be so meaningful to so many people. And it's very early on the journey, but I trust that there's a reason for this. There's a purpose to it, and it's such a beautiful thing. And the channeling, all of this work, it comes down to faith. Faith is such a strange concept to many people, because it's intangible, and it represents so many negative connotations as well. Coming back to your original question around your initial statement that you made at the beginning about it being such a divisive thing, and this concept of God and religion and faith. And at the end of the day, we believe what we believe. And the vast majority of people believe in this because it's true, because it's real. And they all get taught it in their own ways. They all think that this is the right way because it's just the way that they were taught. It's what they learned. It's what their parents did. It's what their grandparents did. I really hope that all of us as a society and as individuals can really learn to open our eyes and to really understand that this thing that we do, this faith that we have, is in something that is so tangible. It is so beautiful. And it's the reason why we have the faith in the first place. But it cannot be exclusive. It has to be inclusive because of the embodiment of what it is. It's this unifying, beautiful force that is the undercurrent of everything. And when we tap into it and we feel it and we have that connection with it, there is no other way to be. There is no other way to understand it. And I just hope that through the work and the message and everything else, that everyone gets to feel that and gets to know that, because it is the most powerful thing that we have as individuals to influence the outcome and of what we can achieve as a collective. But if we're all in our own little silos and we're all butting heads and doing things and fighting with each other because we think our way is the right way, then it's never going to work. We're never going to ultimately fulfill our purpose as a collective here in this existence through doing that. We have to work together, and we have to realize that we're all doing the same thing for the same beautiful common purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for articulating that. It's such a powerful first-hand account of what it means to awaken. We put many words on this: awakening, enlightenment. Maybe we're all enlightening. But that inner experience of God is something that more and more people are waking up to. It's something that we read about in the scriptures, you read about with all the great saints. But more and more people are having it through, whether it's meditation, as you described. Some people are having a taste of it through plant medicines. Some people are having a taste of it through breath work. And it all seems like we're having a taste of the same thing. There's many directions I want to go here, and I've got a few more questions. But the first thing I want to ask you is, what do you think it takes for someone to have the experiences that you have had?
Curiosity is one thing I would say I know that there are a lot of people who, like me, would feel dissatisfied or disillusioned in many ways about religion, about their own upbringings and being forced to go to church and be part of this thing that they don't really understand. And yes, they might get some benefit from it, and there are lots of practical benefits to it, as I said earlier on. But if you don't have that experience of your own, why would you keep doing it? Why is it fulfilling? Why is it? And I think that there are so many people in this world that just feel like there's something missing. Like they might have success, at a practical level in terms of all the things that we programmed to think are important, right? They might have great jobs and good families and lots of wealth and comfort in their lives, but they still feel like there's something missing. Then they can't put their finger on it. They can't articulate what it is, but then the more that they occupy themselves with the busyness of life and chasing these goals that they think are going to be the next elixir for happiness, the more that they feel that there's something that's not, or it's something that's missing. And that's because they're not living their purpose. And I think that, to your point, more and more people are waking up to this. More and more people are, and COVID was a big part of this. People are dissatisfied by this life that we have programmed for ourselves as important, and the definition of what success is. I think younger generations that are growing up now are inherently more open to the idea that there are other possibilities, that there's a different way to be. They're not force-fed into these kind of pigeonholes the way that we were when we were growing up. And I think that people are increasingly dissatisfied by this idea that there's something missing. They want to understand what that is. They want to know what they can do to find more fulfillment in their lives. And so there's this innate curiosity in people to go, what is that? How do I find that? What do I need to do to work out what it is that's missing? And how do I scratch that itch? And more people are becoming more frustrated by this. And that's all it takes. And that's the whole purpose of the book, is just to help people understand that there is this other way to be. It's not about trying to tell people what to do I'm not preaching in any way. I'm just sharing my own story. And hopefully in doing so, I can help to inspire some people to understand that there are these other ways to find fulfillment, to find your purpose in life. And so once you have that curiosity, and it's just not good enough to continue with the status quo, then you're already on your journey. And then it's just a matter of finding what it is that works for you. What's the channel that works for you? And for me, it was meditation. And it's I just find it such a simple, beautiful way to get access to this immensely powerful source that I describe, because it's free, it's easy to do. It's the most intuitive, natural thing in the world. It's been around since the dawn of time. Since people have been writing things down, they've talked about meditation. They've talked about the practice of meditation. There's a reason for that. But for other people, it's breathwork. We live in a society where people are time poor. They have low attention spans. Meditation is not something that you just start doing it overnight. You're on this enlightenment journey. It takes years of dedication to the practice. But blimey, the benefits you get from it are so immense that I'm such a big proponent of this, because it's so life-changing, it's so transformational, and it's so easy. Just all we need to do is just get into the habit of doing it on a regular basis. And then, it doesn't take too long for you to realize the benefits. For other people, breathwork it's almost like an accelerant. It's a very fast way to get to the same experience that you get to through years of meditation practice, but you're not necessarily geared up for it. You're not necessarily ready for the experience that you're going to have. And so a lot of people react in quite a radical way to breathwork, because suddenly they're tapping into their unconscious and their subconscious, and they've never accessed these emotions before, these pent-up emotions that have been there since they were 5 years old or whenever they had these experiences. And so there's this kind of release, there's this reaction to this work, because suddenly you're tapping into stuff you just never know existed, and they have these mind-blowing experiences and they go, oh, that's incredible. But unless you're doing these things regularly and you're keeping that up as a practice, you're not necessarily going to reap the long-term benefits from it. A lot of people move from things like breathwork into meditation, or they go, oh, wow, that's so powerful. How do I get more of that? How do I make that part of my day-to-day? There are lots of different ways. For lots of people, just the practice of prayer. Prayer is just another form of meditation in many ways. My father used to go on retreats every year as a practicing priest. You would go on a silent retreat and you would spend hours every day just praying, just connecting with God. It's just exactly the same way as I would go and spend 6 days at a Vipassana retreat and do lots and lots of repetitive rounds of meditation in different forms and Dharma teachings and things like that. It's all just about strengthening and deepening our connection with God. So it doesn't matter really what your channel is. It's just find what works for you. And it doesn't take long for you to realize and to feel the benefit of what you're doing through whatever the channel is. But there are lots of different ways, lots of different avenues for people to access this, and just find out what works for you.
Yeah. The prayer is such an interesting one.
Yeah.
Because in the same way, when you meditate and you get into that space, that quiet space, it's almost like it's that space that you're meditating in, that you realize you are when you meditate, is the same space that where God speaks to you, right? Say through channeling, and there's a very particular flavor to it. And I think one of the things for me growing up in the Presbyterian church was we would pray, but we weren't in that space. We weren't on that frequency, whatever that is. And we didn't really know how to pray. We didn't know what that was. There was no meditation, first of all. There was no real understanding of what prayer meant or how to do it. I'm going to controversially say there's very fundamental or basic understandings about self-mastery just missing completely from most of the organized religion, particularly in the Christian side. And it's like the inner school of Christianity about the self-work and the self-development and the dealing with traumas and understanding how to meditate and how to pray. Those things are actually missing from the Sunday school practices, from the churches, and the proponents of the priests, the pastors, are not necessarily very skilled in this area. When you go to India, you see these masters, and the reason they're masters is because they have done the work. Like the thing that keeps it fresh over there is you go and you meet this person, you go, wow, there's a power here that's so inherent that it's just pulling me towards this person. It's reminding me of my true nature. And when I'm around them, I feel this incredible love that is God that you describe, and they magnetize me. And I think to speak on my own experience, I've gone to church growing up, I've gone to Catholic sermons, Presbyterian sermons, and I haven't met someone in that faith who has that same magnetism. They go through seminary and they come out and they're doing their absolute best on their journey, but they're not in the same conversation as a Ramana Maharaji or a Neem Karoli Baba or some of these Indian sages. And I think it can't be overestimated the importance of getting into those practices ourselves and really doing the work and earning and training ourselves and purifying ourselves to be able to access our relationship with God more clearly. I think that is the path of the seeker, and it's something that's super important for everyone. I'm really curious about now your understanding of God and how you can articulate what God is. And then when you reflect now, post these experiences, on the struggle and the pain and the senseless, the violence of apartheid and the hatred, and then the apparent evil of those men in Thailand and the proprietors and just the horrible things that happen from a human perspective in the world. How does your understanding of God now help you reconcile or investigate how a God could allow such things to exist?
Yeah, it's such a big question. And suffering it's almost something that is innately part of society. It's part of who we are. It's part of the experience that we all have. And suffering takes on different forms. And for some, it's so much more acute than for others. Buddha, the way that he talked about human suffering was not being in alignment, right? All of us suffer through not being in alignment, of not being connected with God, of not fulfilling our purpose, of being caught up in all of these things that we're being programmed to believe are the right way to be and to be conducting ourselves. And so there are degrees of suffering. And of course, it's very hard to reconcile some of the atrocities that happen in this world. And I get asked this question. It's not an easy one to answer, because how can you condone these things? How can you say, oh, there's a purpose for these things to be? But there are two sides to every coin. And for every bit of human suffering, for every event that is cataclysmic, that causes mass destruction or causes mass grief, there is a kind of rallying force that happens on the other end of that. And we live in a world where we're constantly reminded of the negative, of the bad, of the things that happen that are against all of the things that we believe are inherently good. What we don't read about is the immense amount of good and courage that people have as a humanity. I've spent a lot of time traveling and being in environments that are foreign to me and having to rely on the generosity of people that I have no idea who they are and that have no connection to me. And I've been so humbled and floored so many times by people's good nature, by people's generosity, going out of their way to be helpful. When you experience the things that I've experienced in so many ways, it's impossible not to fall in love with humanity, with this immense sense of connection that we have to one another, of supporting one another. And even with things like the recent Bondi incident, of course, it's a huge atrocity, but you see the extent to which people are rallying around as a communities, supporting those that have been adversely affected by these events. The immense outpouring of love and just dogged determination not to let these forces of evil prevail is so profound. And this is what changes people's lives. This is what influences people to believe, to have faith, to really deeply acknowledge this immensely powerful connection that we feel to one another, even if we don't have these practices, these experiences that I've talked about of feeling this oneness, of feeling this connection with God. And a lot of these things are driven by people who have deep, innate religious beliefs, and that is a unifying factor that brings them all together. And these things only strengthen that belief, it only strengthen that sense of connection. And it sometimes requires these extreme ends of the spectrum in order for us to come together in this way, but we do. And the power of that is immense. I had a very unfortunate experience when I was growing up of losing one of my best friends. And we were 19 years old and we just in university, we were a very close-knit unit of friends. And one of our group died in a car accident way before his time. He was just the most beautiful human you'd ever meet. And of all the people to go so young, you just question yourself, like, why? How does this even happen? But I had this experience after Mike died, and where we'd grown up in this really strict Christian upbringing, and I was taught the whole dogma of Christianity and how I was meant to believe about things and heaven and earth and all of these things. And okay. And then I had this experience of one of our group of friends, one of the people in our group said to us after Mike's death, and we'd been to visit him for 2 weeks in hospital because he was in a coma, and we would go and talk to him, and just it's hard to know how to respond in those situations, but we just have conversations with him and just tell him how much we love him and just like joke about how he's bunking school and all this kind of stuff, or bunking uni, sorry. And Anyway, so he unfortunately passed after those 2 weeks, and it was probably singularly the most devastating experience I've had. And then one of our group of friends' mothers, a medium, and she asked us if we wanted to connect with Mike.
So she's a medium who could channel spirits.
Correct, yeah. And so to me, this was mind-blowing concept. I was like, what do you mean? So we decided that's something we wanted to do, if nothing else, just to be able to say goodbye to him. And so we went to his house and we went into the drawing room, and I just remember it's clear as day. And it's one of those milestone moments where it's like I was there yesterday. And she just sat down with a pen and paper, and there were 3 of us in the room. And she just started, it was very quiet for a while. And then after a while, she started scribbling on the page, and just illegible, just scribbles. And then slowly those scribbles started to become slightly more legible, and then just got into flow, and she started writing. And for Mike's amazing attributes, the one thing that he was terrible at was his handwriting was awful. It was like a doctor's scribbler. And it was unmistakably Mike. Like you could see absolutely it was his handwriting. He was sitting there and she was channeling him. And he basically said things to us that he could know from being in that hospital room for those 2 weeks, and about how he was so grateful for us coming to see him and responding to things that we'd said to him. But he also said, I don't want you to worry about me because I'm in the most beautiful place you could ever imagine. And that was really eye-opening for me as a 19-year-old, growing up in this kind of environment of being told how everything is. It shattered all of that in that moment. And I suddenly had a very different understanding and perception of the afterlife and what was possible and our ability to connect with it, and how could that be? And that really set off my whole, my innate curiosity that I grew up with suddenly escalated after that point. And I was like, wow, this is very revolutionary for me. I need to explore this more. And then I became fascinated by this whole idea of the afterlife and heaven and hell. And it's been a big part of my journey. Anyway, the reason I tell you the story, there's no way that anybody can condone what happened. But I know that in death, Mike has changed people's lives so much, not just my own, in such a meaningful way. And it's just part of this rich tapestry of life. We need to accept that these things happen. And yes, they're awful and you can't condone them when they happen. But it's what takes so many of us on our journeys. It's cause and effect. It's what causes us to go and respond in a different way to the way that we responded before. It causes us to ask different questions. It causes us to respond and to react in a way that stimulates our oneness, our unity, our innate desire and need to operate as a collective for a common good. And that's the only way I can reconcile it. And I hope that all of us get the opportunity to experience what I've experienced, to experience what you experience through your spiritual practice, because it's so deeply meaningful. But for those that don't, even having these experiences of feeling close and connected and supported and loved and cherished and belonging to groups of communities, and this is immensely powerful. That's what gives us joy. It's what gives us happiness. And for all of these atrocities, there is so much joy.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story. It's touching and also inspires so much hope. And I just want to touch briefly on experiences and having experiences on the spiritual path. I think there's a real craving for really high experiences to prove the existence of God or to prove that there is a spiritual dimension. And my own journey with that has been realizing that you will be given those experiences if you need them. If they're for you in your path, you will receive them.
Yeah.
And for some people, they don't receive them. And I have had certain experiences so far that have shown me things exactly when I needed them. And other times when I've really craved experiences or tried to do psychedelics to get experiences, I haven't been given them. And so there's something about experience that can be a trap to chase experience. And I think what you point to is that it's actually even in the most mundane, in the everyday moments, when you sit in meditation or even if you just come into presence when you're looking at the ocean, or there's a silence and there's a peace in that silence. There's a sense of that there's something greater here. There's a space in which all of this is arising. Or when you meet a newborn child, or you see the love that comes into a grandparent whenever they see, or it comes into a parent, or you've had a child yourself. All of these things point us towards the divine. And I think a mature conversation about God has to acknowledge that the purest of evil, the most heinous of acts, also happen in God. They're part of it all. And there can be no light without the dark. And I think even when we look at our own lifetimes, actually the darkest things that happened to us were the biggest lessons that brought us the light. I think Thich Nhat Hanh says it beautifully in a poem, which a couple of lines are which, I am the mayfly just hatched, and I'm also the frog that eats the mayfly. I am the young child, and I'm also the pirate who's raping the child, my heart yet not capable of love. And there's something about forgiveness, about dropping into a space of just, almost from a human perspective, incomprehensible compassion for the lives of people, that for me is a true experience of God. To really say, if I was in that person's situation and I had the life experiences and the trauma, I would do the exact same thing. And that the hatred and all of that stuff actually comes from the lack of love, the lack of inability to access love. And once we have those experiences, they motivate us to come back to love. And you write beautifully in your book about forgiveness as being one of our greatest powers. And you also write about, after these incredible experiences you've had, the everyday work of battling the ego. It keeps going. It doesn't stop. You don't go, wow, I've had this incredible experience on York Street and now I'm just pure love all the time. And so I'd love to hear your journey with ongoing the everyday challenges and your relationship to your understanding of ego, your relationship to ego, and then this whole area of forgiveness, self-forgiveness and forgiveness of others. And what is your everyday experience like now?
Yeah, ego is, as I write about it, is one of, to me, probably the most difficult thing to not let go of, but just to try and overcome, because it's so much about what defines us. And we all grow up thinking about ourselves in an egoic form. And I've had to come to terms with that and make peace with it, because we're always going to be in part defined by our egos. I think it's got a lot of practical applications and very helpful for us in many ways to operate in the society that we're in. We can't constantly live in this kind of blissful state that we tap into, but when we do tap into it, we bring more of its benefits into our day-to-day. And the beauty about meditation is it's so gradual, and that you don't notice it straight away, but you notice it over periods of time. And so you would surprise yourself when you respond to a particular situation. It could be 3 years down the line or 5 years down the line, and a situation can happen, and what you say or how you respond to it and react to it is completely different to what you would have done 3 years ago. And you actually stop yourself in your tracks and go, wow, that was pretty cool. I would not have done that before. And so you find that slowly, very slowly and very gradually, your perception of ego and your perception of who you are becomes redefined. And so you become more and more of your true self on such a incremental, gradual basis. But over a period of time, you transform who you are. And coming back to the analogy of the mirror, now when I look at myself in the mirror, I like who I see. I love who I see, and I recognize that, and I recognize that it's now part of who I am every day. It's not just who I want to be. It's not that young 20-something-year-old, 30-something-year-old desperate to break out of it. It's now I have embodied that in my day-to-day. And it manifests in many beautiful ways through connections with people, through relationships, just through how I interact with the world and the beauty and the joy that I experience every day in being part of this existence. My sense of ego will always be there. We always want to look our best and be attractive to people and be recognized for the things that we do. But it's our perception of what's important that shifts. And because we're increasingly in this state of oneness, of unity, of connection, that sense of recognition falls away gradually. And so we crave it less. And the things that we always thought were important to our happiness and success, including success, it just becomes so much less relevant. And what actually just becomes the way that we are and what defines us is how we turn up every day, how we interact with the world, and how we behave. And through this joyfulness, through this experience of connection and the embodiment of all of that, we actually we want for less, because a lot of what defines our ego is the things that we want. And so we end up wanting what we have, not having what we want. And it's a really beautiful place to be. And so the ego kind of falls away in a very gradual way. We still need it. We still acknowledge it. We still recognize that it'll always be there, but it doesn't define who we are as much. And so I think you get to this beautiful harmony where you just make peace with it, as I've done. On the topic of forgiveness, as I write in the book, it's probably the hardest thing for us to do. It's connected to ego in many ways because we feel that those who have done us a disservice, or we have these kind of amazing dreams or thought bubbles about revenge and coming out of situations in a more favorable way at the expense of others who have done us a disservice. But these are just dreams and fantasies. The ability for us to actually genuinely forgive is inordinately difficult as human beings. And it's something my father struggled with, as I write about. The idea that there were people who belonged to gangs in South Africa who were the architects of drugs being available to young kids on the street, of mass murders, of destabilizing communities through violence, domestic violence, all sorts of atrocities. For these people then, and there's one individual he talks about in particular when I interviewed him, who then became a born-again Christian and then decided that he was going to turn his life around and turn his mess into his message, and then work to help others who were reformed gang members to turn their lives around. And for my father, he always struggled with that idea. It's like, how do you find forgiveness for people like that, who, even though they're turning their lives around and they're trying to create more meaning and they're trying to help people, the devastation that they caused, the ramifications of the work that they've done and those drugs that have now messed up so many people's lives and have generational impacts. How do you reconcile with those things, with all those people that have been murdered? And he's a man who's dedicated his life to the service of God, who teaches forgiveness. Yet he finds it really challenging to reconcile that in his own heart. Nelson Mandela, to me, was one of the most iconic human beings of our generation, of my generation. Not just because of what he represented in terms of the struggle against apartheid, which as we were staunchly in opposition against. It was because he spent 26 years of his life in a cell 2 meters by 2 meters on a hard concrete floor. And I've been to Robben Island, and there's a bench that they slept on with no blankets and pillows, and it's freezing cold, and you're in the harshest conditions and having to work under slave labor during the day. He did that for 26 years. And at some point during that time, he learned to forgive. He learned to forgive both himself, and he learned to forgive those that put him there. And when he came out, he wrapped his arms around the nation And there was no sense of anger or animosity. It was all just coming from a place of sheer love and beautiful intention of healing. I don't know many people that would do that or that could do that. The ability to find that within ourselves, find that ability to forgive, it really stems from our ability to connect with ourselves inwardly and to find peace within ourselves. Because if we can't find that peace within ourselves, how can we emanate that outwards? How can we find peace with others and be at peace with others? And so I think it all comes back to this single basic premise of, again, coming back to Maharishi's teaching of the reason why I got into TM in the first place and fell in love with the concept of his dream was to create a peaceful world by each of us finding peace within. To me, that was so powerful because it made me realize that it doesn't matter who we are. We can be a beggar on the street in Calcutta, or we can be at the upper echelons of political influence. We all have the same ability to bring about positive change through inward connection and through the work that we can all do to be the best versions of ourselves. Because if we can do that, then everything else flows from that. Our ability to forgive, our ability to accept. Acceptance is a very important part of forgiveness. There are steps in that process, but we have to accept that these things have happened and that they happened for a reason. Make peace with that. And then once we can do that, then we have the ability to forgive. But we have to start from a place of self-love, of self-awareness, and of self-forgiveness, because we're our own worst enemies, right? Let's face it. We all beat ourselves up 1,000 times more than we give ourselves a high five for all the good things that we did. So every time we make a mistake and we dwell on all the things that we did that were wrong, we're our own worst enemies. But at the end of the day, we're also the only people that have the ability to forgive ourselves. And if we can learn to do that, is immensely powerful.
Yeah, and I'm brought back to the words of the Buddha, which is, what is the greatest thing that you can do for humanity, for the world, is to awaken yourself, actually. And that there's a real temptation that when something like the Bondi Massacre happens, or something like an evil, you see an evil, there's a real temptation to say, to condemn it completely and to unconsciously hold hatred in your heart for those who did it. And when you do that, you unconsciously create more hatred in the world. And we get into this trap of seeing individuals on the other side as opposition, rather than recognizing that the true opposition is actually hatred itself. It's ego itself. It's the belief and identification in something that is separate, as opposed to the recognition that we are all one in unity. And so as we start to work on that and forgive those who hurt us, forgive our own egos and bring them into this space of love, we recognize that the same awareness that's in me is also in you. And it's also in the people who created those atrocities. And that we are alike, actually, and we're one in God. And so to be able to just go up to that level and transcend and see that the real enemy here is actually our own hatred, our own fear, our own sadness, and just to start to win that battle inside ourselves, that is actually how the whole vibration of the world will change. And as counter as that seems, as difficult as that seems, as much as you want to say, that other person, like, just hate them, the more time you spend in that frequency, the more time you are just recreating the same thing again and again. And ultimately, until we can forgive ourselves and forgive others, we're never going to get out of this mess that we're in. You speak beautifully at the end of your book about the kingdom of God. As people who are raised in religious backgrounds, particularly in the Christian religion, we get the sense that the kingdom of God is somewhere else, that heaven is somewhere else, that it's a place we need to get to after life. But you talk about, and Jesus also says this, that the kingdom of God is inside our own hearts. And so I'd love you to speak a bit about coming to that realization and how we can all access this place, if you like.
The concept of heaven and hell is such a big one, and I get why it was described and indoctrinated the way that it was, as a deterrent, as a way to, in many ways, people believe that religion was used as a way to curse society and to gain control over the masses, and probably a lot of merit in that. But this whole concept of heaven and hell is something that you grapple with as a young child growing up and being taught all of the stuff. And then you have these experiences like I did with Mike, and suddenly your blinkers are wide open and there's this whole world of possibility. And then you go on this journey of consciousness and an understanding that we're part of something so much bigger than ourselves, and that there's this kind of unifying force for good that is the undercurrent of all that is and all that ever was. And you just go, wow, that is so immensely powerful. And so as I've gone through that journey and understanding that where we come from energetically into this world, and to learn and to grow and to increase our vibration as an individual, but as a collective, and our contribution to the collective. And then going back to this whole idea of going home, this concept of going home, and that experience or feeling of going home. When we die, going back to that sense of belonging and going home through our being reunited or be unified with this immense, beautiful sense of all that is, with God, being reconnected with God. That is a joyful experience. That, to me now, knowing that the last breath I ever take is going to be my happiest, is such a powerful idea, concept. It means that you're just at peace with yourself, and you're at peace with the world, and whatever happens, that it's all going to happen because it's meant to, and this cause and effect, and all we can do is just turn up and be the best versions of ourselves, and try and elevate our vibration to the extent that we can, and learn as much as we can in this existence. And it wasn't until I was actually writing the book, for a long time, that sense of heaven and hell had morphed into the idea that when I die, or when people die, they get experienced or exposed to the experience of being reunited with God. And if you haven't lived a good life, or you've created atrocities, or whatever are the reasons why you wouldn't then be allowed or permitted to go to heaven, that what would happen is that you'd be exposed to that, but then that you would be denied it. And that you would then live in this kind of existence of non-connection, of non-fulfillment, of just being destitute, but knowing what you're missing out on. And that, to me, then became this bigger deterrent even than anything. It was like, can you imagine just kind of, living in sort of isolation. But then when I was writing the book, the work of Eckhart Tolle was something that became very prominent to me as I was going through that writing process as well. And as I talk about in that final chapter, this concept that he talks about of being, and of us just being in the present moment. And he equates it to the idea of heaven and hell, and this kind of eternal struggle that we have in this existence, in this world. And that really resonated with me. And then that really landed, because it brought together all of this idea of suffering, of this idea of the struggles that we have living in this world, of trying to find our way in this world, of trying to find our purpose in this world, of trying to define who we are and why we're here and work it all out. And just this whole idea of us being able to find heaven on earth was just such a beautiful realization, a beautiful awakening to me. And then it really aligns with so many of the scriptures, and of the idea, again, it all comes back to the same idea of finding God within. And so that's the reason why it's the final chapter. And it just brought everything together for me, because understanding that was so immensely powerful, and that it isn't something that happens when we die. We can be exposed to that sense of what it is to go home, or to be connected with God, or be reunited with God in this world through our lived experience. And when you realize that, and through all of the work that you do through this inward connection and how that manifests in your day-to-day, and as I was talking about, the dissolution of ego over time and becoming a person who is more themselves, who's more connected with self and more connected with God on a daily basis, then you realize that you are actually able to and are living this sense of heaven on earth. And unfortunately for most people, they have the opposite experience of not having that sense of connection, of not having exposed that, not having that awareness. And that's essentially what embodies suffering, human suffering. And we know that many people in this world just don't have that, live joyful existences, don't feel that sense of connection and community and love and all of the things that we get to experience all of the time. And that's a great sadness to me. And so again, coming back to the purpose of the book, it's if I can share my own experience and my own perception of these things, maybe that will resonate with some people. Maybe it will just help them to understand or think about these things conceptually in a different way. And that all of these things are available to us now. And that's the most exciting part of this to me. And this really gets me just energized when I wake up in the morning and I think about how I conduct my life and what's possible. And it's all of these things are just imminently accessible to every single one of us. We just need to find our own way to get there.
Yeah.
And we can have the lived experience of heaven on earth, of being in a continuously joyful state. And if we can do that as a collective, if enough of us do that as a collective, the possibility is all of our existential issues are resolved through this one magnificent concept. Because we do behave differently towards one another. We behave differently towards our planet. We don't seek to gain at the expense of others. We want to help. We want to grow and unite as one and become something much more powerful. It's a beautiful concept. And I just love it so much because there's a knowingness in this. I've spent my life trying to work it all out. And now I just know. And everybody will have different opinions about these things, of course. And there are lots of people that will disagree and just go, oh, that's just a bunch of nonsense. But because when you experience this in your heart, there's this truthfulness about it that nobody can ever dispel me of this notion. It's impossible because I just know. And there's an innate peacefulness in that. There's just knowing that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be at exactly the time that I'm supposed to be here. And that I can't rush this process. This is just part of my journey. And all I can do is turn up every day and do the work and keep investing in myself and just be the best version of who I am. And that's a beautiful thing when you can just be in the present and learn to accept, learn to forgive, learn to just acknowledge all of the beautiful things that we have around us all of the time. And just to be at peace with the fact that despite all of these atrocities that happen around us all of the time, that there is this beautiful undercurrent of good, of love. And its pure purpose, its pure intention is for all of us to live our purpose and to have our best experience here on this earth. And to me, it's just such a beautiful concept. And I want everybody to know this.
Yeah.
As do you. That's why we do what we do.
Absolutely. And that's why we're here speaking about this today. That's why this podcast exists. There's something, the clearest, most direct way that I've come to be able to experience this is I wake up every morning and immediately my ego comes in the form of thoughts about what I need to do that day. And it's lack, it's attachment, it's this idea that I'm doing it all and all this pressure is on me and that there's something that can go wrong today that could really destroy me. It comes every morning and it has come every morning for as long as I can remember. But then I sit and meditate. And in that space of meditation, it creates a distance between that mind, and I can exit the mind and I can go into a space, or I can return home actually to who I am, the awareness that is aware of all of these things. And then I'm reminded of your parents every Sunday just coming back home again, no matter how many times you drop out, how many times you fall away, realizing that you're never really away, and just coming back. And so whatever that practice is for you, and once you taste it, whether it's after a meditation or whether it's in the arms of a loved one, or where there's a felt sense of unity, there's a felt sense of, everything is okay. And once you can know that energetic signature, then you can know that anything that's not that is ego. Anything that's not that is not true. And this isn't critically important, because until you have a barometer to say, this is the way, that's not true, then your mind is constantly trying to guess. But what you've described beautifully is an aspect of God is love, right? But another aspect of God is truth. It's knowing. And so when you get that signature, that flavor, and you have a decision to make, you can close your eyes and go, what is the lightest way possible? What's the most expansive path for me? No matter how big the decision is, there will come through a knowing of where to go. And it's very different from the fear-based conversation that your ego is having with you all the time. So I think that one of the reasons why your story is so powerful is that doing the work to earn the ability to know that kingdom of God inside your own heart gives you this ability to discern, to make decisions, to go through everyday life, to be an executive in corporate and to find meaning in that. And it also starts to show you purpose, because purpose is, in every area of your life, following that sense of expansion. It's not one thing, it's not career, it's everywhere. It's following the light everywhere. And so I want to thank you for following that and sharing your purpose. And I'm excited to see what you're going to do as you go forward. And I'd love to share with people, if they want to connect with you or if they want to read the book, where can they get it? And where can we point them?
Thank you for that, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. Now, I just want to pick up on that, on what you've just said around the corporate environment, because one of the things that I've really struggled with for many years is this idea of being on the spiritual path and also living this existence in a corporate capacity, where the one is imminently fulfilling and exciting, and you just feel like you're scratching the surface on this massive journey that's ahead of you, and you just want to see where it goes. But on the other end, you're at a very practical, purely practical level, you're having to dedicate most of your time and energy to a cause which is much less fulfilling and almost functional in a way, because you've got to pay the mortgage and all of the things we all know about. And I always felt that these two things couldn't coexist, almost like opposite ends of magnets or batteries when you try and push them together, polar opposites. But one of the things that I've come to realize over recent years is that living our purpose is not defined by what we do. It's how we turn up, and it's our ability to apply these spiritual practices to our everyday, irrespective of what we're doing. And it's interesting because I got into meditation in the first place because of this stress, because of anxiety. And many of these things were generated by my corporate environment. And if it hadn't been for that, who knows where I'd be right now. But also,
the corporate environment was God in disguise. It was your guru in disguise.
Yeah, that's right. Cause and effect. Right? We can't choose how we get here. The important thing is that we do. But also adopting the benefits of the meditation practice over the years into how I turn up and how I exercise these skills, or the benefits of that. They manifest in my everyday interactions with my colleagues, with my clients, how I think about the purpose of what I'm doing at work. A lot of the skills that I'm developing through the corporate environment are going to be so valuable to me in the work that I continue to do along the spiritual path, whatever form that takes. And so I've made peace with this idea that these two things can absolutely coexist. And I think it's probably something that many people struggle with, because they get a taste of this other way to be and the beauty of this ability to tap into this energetic realm. And why wouldn't they want to be spending all of their time doing that? But the reality is that we all have families and we all have things that we need to do, and we can't just chuck it all in and go down this spiritual path, which is, from a practical sense, not going to allow us to live our true potential in many ways and realize our true potential. And some do with great success, but it's not for all of us. And the message I guess I want to leave people with is that there are so many ways that you can have these two things coexisting in a beautiful and a harmonious way. You can make time for yourself to meditate every day. And if meditation is your channel that you choose, we all have busy lives, but you find a way to do it. And it doesn't take long to create good habits. And once you do, it just becomes something that you don't even think about it. And then you realize, after a while, you realize the benefits of it. You do it because you want to do it. There is no option. It's just, there's so much joyfulness in it. And even it's your time to yourself, that ability to switch off for 20 minutes a day or 20 minutes twice a day, just to have that time to yourself and to quiet the noise and to go beyond the mind and just to relieve yourself of thoughts. Those thoughts that dominate our consciousness all of the time is so beautiful. And each time you come out of that practice, you bring some of that with you, so that there's this calmness, this groundedness, this wholesomeness, this authenticity. You become more of your true self. And when you bring more of your true self into any environment, you can only be successful. So it's how we apply those skills and those attributes that we bring from these practices into our daily lives, and just trying to spend as much time as we can, as much time as we can allow ourselves and gift ourselves to be connected in that way, and then we bring that out with us, and it's so gradual, but you notice it, and then people respond to that. You become a better leader. You become more empathetic. You really learn how to listen to people and really learn to understand what it is, why they turn up and why they do what they do, and then that allows you to become a better guide and to help them get the most out of their journeys. So the ripple effects of this stuff is immense, and it's such a beautiful, joyful idea to know that we can all access these things and that we can all bring them into our day-to-day lives and actually turn something that we are fearful of and that we don't want to spend time on injecting our energy into. We can flip that narrative because it changes our perspective, and perspective is everything. And if we can use it to our advantage and think about how we're investing our time and energy in a different way, that's how we bring joyfulness and happiness into our day-to-day.
Yeah, I just think that is such an important message, because the meditation that you do on the mat, as soon as you pick that up and bring it into the world, that then you realize, well, that's actually the true arena in many ways. The path of the monk, the path of the renunciate is one path, but the path of the householder, the path of the person in the world, it's called the bodhisattva path, the path of taking something and going into the world to help awakening as many beings as possible, is the path that many of us will need to tread now. And you start to realize that really the reason you hated your job so much was because you were suffering under a lot of egoic illusions. You were fighting with people in your head. You were showing up in ways that weren't really great because of your confusion and of your own trauma. And as soon as you start to change that and you show up to people in a different way, they start to respond differently. And suddenly people who you go, I used to hate that person. Literally, they used to annoy me so much. But all it was always was just a mirror showing you where you need to grow. And when you do start to grow, then suddenly that mirror starts to clear and you start to bring out a different side of them completely. And then there's depth in relationships. You speak to people about and you be fully yourself and they respond completely differently. And suddenly the life that you hated and the external circumstances you hated actually can become a heaven. And then if there is an aligned move for you to make, you make it from that place. What I just feel in myself, and I've met many people who, when they first start to meditate and they awaken in some way, they just think, I have to change my whole life. And they start to make big life decisions from a place of running away and trying to get away and do all that stuff. And actually what I found is a much more mature and fruitful path is to do the work yourself on yourself and then watch your external world change in response to that. And so I think there's real wisdom in what you've shared there. And is there anything else that you feel like we haven't covered that you'd like to leave with people before we let them know they can connect more with you?
Yeah, you asked me about that So my website is www.themangotree.me, and the idea behind the mango tree and the reason why there's a mango on the front cover of the book is Maharishi Yogi, who was the founder of Transcendental Meditation, or who revived it. He was always very clear that Transcendental Meditation in itself is not a religion, but he equated it to being like meditation as nourishing the roots of the mango tree. And each of the branches of the mango tree is a different manifestation of how we choose to connect with God, whether that be Christianity or Islam or Hinduism or just being good humans. And through the practice of meditation, we become the best Christians that we can be, or the best Muslims that we can be. And the fruit of that is that the outcome of that is that this tree has the most beautiful, ripe and voluptuous mangoes, and that each of us becomes the best mango that we can possibly be. And I just love that whole concept. And so that's why I've embodied all of this in the concept of the mango tree. So my email address is matt@themangotree.me. You can reach me there anytime. All of my details are available on the website. I've got an Instagram page and a Facebook page, all under the mango tree as well. And those are accessible via the website. I probably will be repackaging that as under my name going forward over the coming weeks. But yeah, I just love that whole concept. And just all I can say is keep turning up, keep doing the work, keep finding your way, whatever your way is, and keep just finding a way to be the best mango that you can be, and to squeeze every drop of goodness out of this life that we are gifted. It's such a privilege.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much. And the book is Son of a Preacher Man. It's available on Amazon and in different places. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I have to say that your ability to articulate that mango tree and to show the unification between all religions and your own experience wrestling with God is so inspiring. And you mentioned in the book that each one of us has a brick to lay. You might not think that your brick is important. You might be listening to this and thinking, oh, I don't have a great story, or I don't have this, or I don't have that. Actually, your story, your voice, whatever it is that truly lights you up in the world is critically important. And all of us need to start laying those bricks, no matter if one person knows you or if 1 million people know you. That's not the point. The point is following purpose and being fully yourself. And the more you be fully yourself, the more you heal the world, and we take a step in the positive direction, and we learn the lessons we've come here to learn. So yeah, thank you for being an example of that and being part of my small contribution to that too. And yeah, blessings, brother.
Appreciate everything that you do. We're all on this journey together, and we all do our little piece, and we're all laying our bricks. God will always come knocking, and it's those of us that are brave enough to answer and to be aware of it first of all, and then to answer the calling. We all have the same opportunity to contribute to this world in a meaningful, positive way. So find what it is that lights you up, and just do that, and be the best version of yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
Lovely to talk to you, and yeah, I wish you all the best.
Yeah, you too. And if you enjoyed this episode, please do follow if you're on Instagram, or follow if you're on Spotify, subscribe if you're on YouTube, follow if you're on Apple Podcasts. It's the single biggest thing that helps us grow, and it's also completely free. And you can also reach me on my website, www.humankinder.au, and all the stuff is up there as well. So thank you very much, and have a great day.